The attorney stopped mid-sentence, set down her pen, and looked at me across the conference table, like she was deciding whether to say what she was thinking. Then she said it anyway. "You need to listen to me very carefully right now. Do not go home tonight. Do not tell your husband you were here. And do not sign anything he puts in front of you, no matter what reason he gives." I thought she had the wrong file. I almost laughed. We were supposed to be reviewing my mother's estate paperwork. My husband had set up the appointment himself, told me it was routine, that my mother's trust needed to be updated now that we were married. He'd even offered to drive me. I'd told him I'd handle it alone because I had errands to run after. Now this woman, reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair, a half-eaten granola bar on her desk, looking like the last person in the world who would say something dramatic, was telling me not to go home to my own house. "What's in the file?" I asked. She turned it around and slid it across the table. "My name is Willa. I'm 31 years old. I teach 4th grade at an elementary school in Raleigh, North Carolina, and until 14 months ago I thought I had built exactly the kind of life I'd always wanted. Small house on a quiet street, a job I loved, a husband who remembered how I took my coffee and rubbed my shoulders without being asked. I thought I had done everything right. My mother passed away 2 years ago and left me her house, a small savings account, and a life insurance policy that had been quietly collecting interest since my father died when I was 9. The total came to just under $400,000. Not generational wealth. Not a trust fund. Just a woman who spent 40 years being careful, driving the same car until it died, buying store-brand everything, because she wanted to make sure her daughter would be okay if something happened to her. I never spent any of it. I kept teaching. I kept paying my rent, our rent by then, and I let the money sit in an account I barely looked at because looking at it made me think about her, and thinking about her still hurt. My husband, I'll call him by his name because he doesn't deserve a gentler title. His name is Marcus. I met him at a friend's birthday party 3 years ago. He was funny and calm, and he asked me real questions, the kind that means someone is actually listening. He was a contractor, he said. Custom home renovations, high-end clients, good money. He dressed well, he drove a nice truck, he seemed solid. My aunt didn't think so. She pulled me aside after our first family dinner, maybe 2 months into dating. She kept her voice low, the way she always did when she had something she knew I didn't want to hear. "That man is performing," she said. "Watch how he acts when no one's looking at him, when he thinks he's off stage." I told her she was being unfair. I told her she'd been suspicious of every man I'd ever dated, and maybe the pattern was her, not them. We were fine after that. Surface fine. Holiday text fine. I chose Marcus over her opinion. I told myself that's what adults do, trust their own judgment. I married him 14 months after we met at a small ceremony in my backyard. The backyard of my mother's house, which I'd moved back into after she died. His parents were there. My aunt stood in the back row with an expression I couldn't read and didn't try to. The first year was good, mostly good, and I've had a lot of time to think about this, the first year was good enough that I didn't look too closely at the parts that weren't. Marcus worked irregular hours. That's normal for contractors, I told myself. Clients call with emergencies. Projects run long. He started keeping his phone on silent instead of vibrate. He stopped leaving it on the kitchen counter when he showered. Small things. The kind of things you could explain away if you were motivated to, and I was very motivated to. He started mentioning my mother's account. Not pushing. Marcus was never obvious about anything. He'd just drop it into conversation, the way you'd drop a stone into still water and then walk away and let the ripples do the work. "Have you thought about what you're going to do with the inheritance?" "My buddy just built a rental property, cash investment, the returns are unreal. We should sit down with a financial advisor together. It's just smart. That money's just sitting there." I didn't do anything with it. Every time he brought it up, something in my chest tightened. And I'd change the subject and he'd let it go. And then 3 weeks later he'd bring it up again from a slightly different angle. Then he mentioned the estate attorney. "My mother's trust needed a review," he said. "Standard stuff after a spouse dies. He meant me, after my marriage. He'd already found someone, already made the appointment, already put it in my calendar. He just wanted to make sure the assets were protected correctly. It was sweet, he said. It was responsible. You're terrible about this kind of paperwork, and you know it. He said it with a smile. He wasn't wrong, which made it harder to argue. I went alone because I had errands. That was the only reason. That's the part that stays with me. If I hadn't had errands, I would never have walked into that office by myself, and I would never have found out. The attorney's name is Patricia. She's been in estate law for 26 years. She had my mother's trust documents spread across her desk when I arrived, along with another set of papers I didn't recognize. Your husband contacted us 3 weeks ago, she said carefully. He came in alone, said he was handling the paperwork on your behalf, that you were overwhelmed with work and had asked him to take the lead. She paused. He asked us to prepare a transfer of power of attorney and a modification to the beneficiary structure of your mother's trust. I heard the words. I understood each one individually. I'm sorry, I said. He came here without me. He said you knew. He said you'd asked him to. She folded her hands on the desk. He was very convincing, but when I looked at the modifications he was requesting, specifically the addition of a secondary account he wanted designated as the management account for distributions. I did some checking. The account number he provided doesn't match any institution that handles trust distributions in North Carolina. She looked at me steadily. It's a private account, Willa, in his name only. The room got very quiet. I asked her to show me everything. She did. For the next 40 minutes, Patricia walked me through what Marcus had been attempting to build over the previous 3 weeks. The paperwork he'd brought in himself. The modifications he'd requested. Small-sounding things with enormous practical consequences. A power of attorney that would let him make financial decisions on my behalf. A change that would route any trust distributions through his private account first. A request to list himself as sole beneficiary in the event of my death, removing the secondary charitable designations my mother had set up herself. If you had signed these documents, Patricia said, and something had happened to you, he would have had access to and potential control over everything. And depending on how your accounts are structured, even while you're alive, the power of attorney as written would have given him authority to make decisions you weren't aware of. I thought about the last month. How Marcus had been especially attentive lately, bringing me coffee in the morning before I was even out of bed. Suggesting we take walks in the evening, touching my arm when we watched TV, the way he had when we were first dating. I'd thought it meant things were getting better, that we were finding our way back to each other. He was setting the stage. He was making sure I was soft and grateful right before he handed me a pen. I sat in that office, and I did not cry. I don't know why. I think some part of me had known in the way you know something before you can say it out loud, and the proof was almost a relief, like finally being allowed to feel what I'd been carrying. He doesn't know I'm here yet, I said. He thinks I'm running errands. I know, she said. I need you to not contact him. I need time. She nodded. Then she said something I've thought about every day since. The documents he brought in are not signed. You haven't been harmed yet, technically. But this tells you what he intended. What you do with that is up to you. I drove to a coffee shop I'd never been to, on a side of town Marcus had no reason to visit. I sat in the corner, with a black coffee I didn't drink, and I thought about my mother. She had spent her whole life making sure I would be okay. She clipped coupons and skipped vacations and drove that car until the check engine light gave up trying to warn anyone. $400,000. It took her 40 years. He was going to take it in an afternoon. I didn't go home that night. I told Marcus I was staying with a friend. He texted back a heart emoji and said to have fun, and that small ordinary response made something crystallize in me. He had no idea. He thought everything was still on schedule. Good. I needed him to keep thinking that. The next morning, I called my friend Josie. We've known each other since college. She's a paralegal, which meant she knew enough to know who I actually needed to talk to. Within 3 hours, I was sitting across from a private investigator named Roland. Ex-military, mid-50s, the kind of man who listens to the whole thing before he says a single word. When I finished, he asked 2 questions. How long has he had access to your joint accounts, if any? And has he ever asked you to sign anything before that you did sign? The joint account we'd opened for household expenses, 18 months old. Small balance, just for bills, but I thought about it harder and remembered. 6 months after we got married, Marcus had asked me to add my name to a savings account he said was for our emergency fund. He'd handed me a card. I'd signed the form without reading it closely because I trusted him. I called my bank from Roland's office parking lot. The emergency fund account had been opened in both our names. The current balance was $4,000. The starting balance, 18 months ago, had been $19,000. $15,000 gone, moved in increments small enough not to trigger an automatic alert. Over a year and a half, while he brought me coffee and rubbed my shoulders and told me I was terrible at paperwork. Roland had results within 2 weeks. Marcus did not own a successful contracting business. He had a business license, a website, and 2 genuine clients he'd worked for in the past 3 years. His actual income was roughly $22,000 annually, cash-based and inconsistent. The truck was leased under terms he'd already defaulted on once and renegotiated. The watch he wore to our wedding was rented. I don't even know how that's a thing people do, but apparently it is. He had $46,000 in personal debt across 4 credit cards and a private loan from someone Roland described only as not a bank. He owed money he didn't have to people who were not patient. And then there was the other woman. I'd like to say I was shocked. I wasn't, entirely. There's a particular kind of attention a man gives you when he's guilty of something, and I'd been receiving that attention for the past month without understanding what it meant. Roland found her through credit card records, hotel stays, as restaurant charges, a weekend in Asheville I'd thought was a job site visit. He'd been seeing her for at least 7 months. She was a bartender at a place near his office, 24 years old, and based on the texts Roland had retrieved through sources, I didn't ask too many questions about. She didn't know he was married. He'd told her he was separated. He'd told her his wife had inherited money and refused to share it, and that the divorce was almost final. He was using me as the villain in a story he was telling someone else. I thought about calling my aunt. I kept putting it off because I knew how the conversation would start, and I didn't think I could handle it. But Roland asked me at our second meeting if there was anyone in my corner with legal knowledge. I thought about the people in my life. I thought about my aunt, who'd been an HR director for 30 years and knew employment and contract law well enough to talk circles around most people. I called her on a Thursday evening. She picked up before the second ring. Willa, I need to tell you something, I said, and then I did, all of it. The attorney's office, the account, the woman in Asheville. I talked for 20 minutes without stopping. She let me. When I finished, there was a pause. Where are you right now? She asked. Josie's apartment. I'll be there in an hour. She didn't say I told you. She didn't bring up the family dinner 3 years ago, or the expression on her face during the wedding ceremony, or any of the times I'd brushed off her concern by finding a kinder explanation for whatever she'd noticed. She walked into Josie's apartment with a bag of food from the Thai place I'd loved since college, sat down at the kitchen table, and said, "Okay, what do we need to do first?" She connected me with a family law attorney that same week. Her name is Renata. Sharp, unhurried, the kind of woman who reads contracts the way other people read novels. She reviewed everything Roland had found, plus Patricia's documentation about the attempted trust modification, plus the bank records showing the transfers from our joint account. He hasn't committed a crime yet in the way a prosecutor would pursue it, she said, which was the one thing I didn't want to hear. The joint account transfers are legally ambiguous since it was a shared account. The trust documents were never signed, so there's no fraud completed there. But the pattern is clear. She looked up. What we can do is make sure that when this ends, it ends on your terms. She explained what that meant. Filing first, documentation, protecting the trust before he could make another attempt. She coordinated with Patricia to formally lock the estate trust against any third-party modifications. She talked to the bank about flagging the joint account, and she helped me understand that the prenuptial agreement Marcus had suggested we not bother with. We trust each other. It's so unromantic. Why would we do that to us? Meant that the legal process would be straightforward but not instant. I went home. I cooked dinner. I asked about his day. I laughed at something on TV and felt my face doing it from a distance, like watching myself in a window reflection. He was warm that night, attentive, kept finding reasons to be in whatever room I was in. He asked casually whether I'd had a chance to look at the estate paperwork. No rush, just whenever. I told him I was planning to review it that weekend. He smiled and said, "That sounded great." I did not sleep for most of that night. My aunt called me the next morning with one more piece of information. She'd done some digging through a connection she had in business licensing and cross-referenced some things Roland had mentioned. This wasn't Marcus's first time. 4 years before we met, he'd been in a relationship with a woman in Charlotte. She owned a small nail salon, 3 locations, had built it herself over 8 years. They'd been together for about a year. He'd convinced her to consolidate her business accounts under a joint management structure for tax efficiency. She discovered the problem when her accountant flagged irregular withdrawals during a quarterly review. By then, a little over $30,000 was gone. She didn't press charges. She'd been humiliated. She blamed herself for being trusting. She just wanted him to leave. He did. He left, and he found me. My aunt found her phone number through the business registration records. The woman's name is Faye. When my aunt explained who she was and why she was calling, Faye went quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell her, I'll say whatever she needs me to say." She'd spent 4 years wondering if she should have done more. She hadn't had anyone to tell her the pattern was the point, that it wasn't a mistake or a bad judgment call or a moment of weakness. He'd done it on purpose, and he'd done it before, and he'd been doing it between. My mother used to host a 4th of July party every year. Everyone came, neighbors, cousins, the friends she'd made teaching piano for 30 years. She'd string lights across the back porch and make her potato salad, and by the end of the night there'd be sparklers. And someone would always cry a little, and it would be okay. After she died, I'd stopped hosting it. Couldn't bring myself to. This year I started it again. I called it a summer cookout, told Marcus it was casual, just people we knew, a chance to open up the yard before the heat got too bad. He liked the idea. He was good at parties, good at charming people, good at being the husband everyone envied me for having. His parents drove up from Fayetteville. My aunt came. Josie came. Renata attended as a guest of my aunt's, which was technically true. A friend of Roland's who happened to be a sheriff's deputy came in plain clothes. Faye drove 3 hours from Charlotte. I did not tell Marcus any of this. The party started at 2 in the afternoon. He worked the yard like he always did. Handshakes, backslaps, that laugh he'd perfected, the one that made everyone feel included. He helped carry food out from the kitchen. He found my hand twice in the first hour and squeezed it. Around 4 o'clock, when the yard was full and the grill was going, and everyone had a drink in hand, he did what I knew he would do. He brought up the estate paperwork again, in front of people, dressed as a loving gesture. "We really need to get that trust stuff sorted," he said, arm around my shoulders, talking to my aunt and Josie like they were in on something with him. "I just want to make sure Willa's protected. She works so hard and I worry about her not having things set up right. You know how she is about paperwork." He looked at me with that warm, rehearsed smile. "I made an appointment for next week. We'll go together this time." I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "Actually, I think we should talk about that now." Something flickered behind his eyes. Gone in less than a second. "Oh, I don't want to bore everyone with legal stuff at a party." "It's okay," I said. "These are people I trust." I walked to the table I'd set up near the back porch and I picked up the folder I'd left there under a cloth napkin. The yard got quieter than a yard full of people usually gets. I didn't perform it. I didn't have a speech prepared. I just told the truth, the way you'd tell it to people who deserve to know. I showed the documents Patricia had given me, the modifications Marcus had drafted without my knowledge, the private account he'd wanted the distributions routed through. I showed the bank statements with the $15,000 removed in careful increments. I talked about the business that wasn't what he'd said it was, the debt, the lease he'd almost lost twice. Then I said, and for the past 7 months he's been seeing someone else. He told her we were separated and that I was refusing to share my inheritance. His mother set down her paper plate. I looked at Marcus. You told her I was the one keeping money from us. He started to say something. His voice came out wrong, too high, and he stopped. Faye stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the fence. She hadn't been introduced to anyone. No one had known who she was. He did the same thing to me, she said. She wasn't loud about it. She said it the way you say something you've needed to say for a long time. 4 years ago, a joint account I'd trusted him with. $31,000. She looked at him directly. You told me it was a wire error. You left before I could get a lawyer. His father turned to look at him and didn't say anything. The deputy came forward and introduced himself. There was enough in the documentation, the fraudulent trust modification attempt, the evidence of the joint account transfers, Faye's formal statement, for a process to begin. It wasn't an arrest on the spot. I want to be honest about that. It was a conversation, a formal notification that a complaint had been filed and a request that he make himself available. He went pale. He tried one more time, just before his parents walked him out of my yard. He looked at me and said, Willa, I love you. Whatever you think happened, I was trying to take care of us. That's all I was ever doing. I said, I know what you were doing. His mother apologized to me at the gate. She looked like someone had taken something from her, which I suppose they had. I didn't have anything to say to that, except that I was sorry too, and I meant it. The legal process took 8 months. Faye's testimony about the pattern, combined with the documentation Patricia had kept about the unsigned trust modification, and the bank records gave prosecutors enough to pursue wire fraud and financial exploitation charges. His attorney negotiated. Marcus accepted a plea that included restitution and probation, which meant no prison time. That part still sits in me sideways. But it meant a criminal record, and it meant he had to pay back every dollar that could be traced. Most of it will come out of whatever he ever earns in the future. I'm not holding my breath. The joint account, I got back what was left. The trust Patricia had locked down was never touched. My mother's $400,000 is still exactly where it is, untouched, building interest, the way she intended. I had lunch with my aunt 2 weeks after the proceedings closed. We sat on her back porch with sweet tea, and she told me about the summer my mother was 17, and convinced her to sneak out and see a concert 2 towns over, and how they didn't get home until 3 in the morning, and their mother had been awake in the kitchen, waiting, and she'd looked at them both and just shaken her head and gone back to bed. I hadn't heard that story before. We've been making up for lost time, my aunt and me. One conversation at a time. The 4th of July party this year was real. Lights across the porch, my aunt's deviled eggs, Josie's playlist that had everyone complaining and then secretly dancing. Someone cried a little near the end of the night. It was me, briefly, and it was okay. I stood in my mother's kitchen after everyone had gone and I washed the dishes by hand, the way she always had because she said the dishwasher didn't get the corners. The backyard was quiet. The lights were still on. He had tried to take the house, the trust, the safety net she'd spent her whole life building for me. All he actually did was remind me who built it, and why, and who I come from. I am my mother's daughter. I grew up watching a woman do hard things quietly, without drama, without waiting for someone to notice. Now I know I can too.